Hello, I'm Miranda Brawn, and I'm the founder and the president of the Miranda Brawn Diversity Leadership Foundation. I'm also the host and the producer for the D.A.R.E podcast. This D.A.R.E podcast is all about having a successful mindset, and we have a new partnership with City AM, where we're going to be interviewing some of the most successful mindsets in the City of London. Now, for those of you who might be wondering, well, what does the D.A.R.E podcast stand for? D.A.R.E is a model that I've been using throughout my success mindset coaching. D stands for having the determination to dream bigger. A is taking the appropriate action. R is having the resilience, and also the self-reassessment in terms of how to look at your skill sets. And the E is having that positive energy to make your dreams come true. So if you would like to be inspired and learn how to develop a successful mindset, you need to be tuning in to our podcast episodes where we will be interviewing some of the most successful mindsets in the City of London. And it all starts right here, right now. So stay tuned. It's really going to be fun. And there's going to be lots of laughter and lots of honest, real talk. So don't forget to tune in, follow and subscribe. Thank you. Hello, welcome back to a new episode of the D.A.R.E podcast, powered by City AM. I am Miranda Brawn, the host and the producer, and I'm also the 60-second success coach. Now, I am so delighted to have a very, very special guest here with us today. Her name is Baroness Brenda Hale. And for those of you who don't know, she became the most senior judge in the UK. She also has been called the Beyonce of the legal world. She is just a glass breaker and very, very amazing. And we're very lucky and fortunate to have her here today. So I would like you to welcome Baroness Brenda Hale to the D.A.R.E podcast. Welcome, Brenda.
Thank you, Miranda. It's a delight to be with you.
It's an absolute pleasure to be here with you today. Now, we were talking before we hit the record button, and when I mentioned to you that you were called the Beyonce of the legal world, I saw that in the Times, but you said to me it wasn't actually the Times that called you that.
I think it was a thing called Legal Cheek.
Yes.
Which is a website that does all sorts of cheeky things with lawyers and judges.
Yes.
Including, on one occasion, it ran some software past the photographs of my colleagues in the Supreme Court, which said how old they really were. And so it had the youngest one looking like a man in his 80s, and the oldest one looking quite juvenile, really. It was very funny. So they do things like that.
They are cheeky,
yes.
And I know the editor there. But we met, I think the first time I met you was maybe 10 years ago at the University of Law. And of course, you're very well known in the legal circles. And so I would love you, for those that don't know who you are, I mean, clearly in the legal world, everyone knows who you are, but our audience are a mixture of students in the classroom to global leaders in the boardroom and beyond. If you don't mind, would you be able to introduce yourself in terms of what you've done and what you're doing at the moment?
Well, I retired in January 2020, so I am now amusing myself by doing things like this and writing. And lecturing, going to conferences, etc., doing some charity work. But before I retired, I was the top judge in the United Kingdom because I was president of the Supreme Court of the United Kingdom. And before that, I was just a member of the top court in the United Kingdom, which started out as being a law lord because we were a committee in the House of Lords. And that's why I'm a baroness and a member of the House of Lords. I wouldn't otherwise be, because I'm not a natural parliamentarian. Yeah. Of course, before that, I was a Court of Appeal judge. Before that, I was a High Court judge. Before that, I was a law commissioner, which is a statutory role promoting the reform of the law. And before that, I was an academic at the University of Manchester. And for a short while, at the beginning of my academic career, I was a barrister. Okay?
Lovely.
That's me in a nutshell.
Yes. Thank you so much for that. I mean, I would still be talking about all the titles and roles. So I'm so glad you did it, because it's a lot quicker than what I would have done. So let's start with your childhood. You grew up in Yorkshire, 3 sisters. You were educated at Richmond High School for Girls in North Yorkshire. What were you like as a child? Did you have great aspirations to be a lawyer?
No, I didn't. I was a specky swat, definitely.
Yeah.
You know, I was top of the class and enjoyed being top of the class.
Yes.
And I enjoyed being the youngest girl in the high school when my big sister was the oldest girl in the high school.
Yeah.
So I was really, as I say, glad to do my lessons. I wasn't any good at art or sport, so I got rid of those as quickly as I could.
Yeah.
And when I and my best friend walked into the domestic science room for the dom-sci lessons, the teacher sighed.
Interesting.
Yes. It's all right now. I mean, I can cook, I can sew, I can do all the things that we did then, but I wasn't any good at them as a class. Anyway, so that's what I was like as a child.
Yes. And so I read somewhere that your head teacher told you that you weren't clever enough to study history, and that's why you were determined to read law.
Well, that's the story I like to tell.
Yes.
I do embellish things from time to time. Basically, she was very keen that I would get into either Oxford or Cambridge because she thought I was clever enough to do that.
Oh, good.
But she was an Oxford history graduate. And so she said to me, Brenda, I don't think you're a natural historian. Can we think of something else you might read? So that's what I translate into, not clever enough to read history. And indeed, in those days, there were quite a few people who read law because they weren't clever enough to read history. It tends to be the other way around now, of course.
Yeah,
but,
definitely.
But the reason that I suggested law, I am convinced, had got nothing to do with courtroom dramas on the television and things like that. I don't think I was in the slightest bit sort of attracted by the theatricality of courtrooms and the criminal justice system. But I had been fascinated in my history lessons with the constitutional history of the 17th century, and all those brave people standing up to the king and saying, no, you can't do that, or we're going to do what we think is right, come what may. The century which established the modern British Constitution, and I thought it was fascinating.
Yes.
So that's what led me into the law.
Wonderful. And so what advice would you give to a young person today who might want to enter the legal industry?
Well, I think the first thing to do is to make sure that you're going to enjoy enough of it to make all the hard work worthwhile.
Yeah.
I think you would empathise with that too,
Definitely,
wouldn't you?
yes.
Because if you don't enjoy enough of the course, you're not going to work hard at it and you're not going to be the best you can be at it. And so you're not going to enjoy everything about learning the law because bits of it can be very boring. And quite a lot of it's quite difficult, intellectually difficult. And some of it's counterintuitive, not what you want it to be, because people go into the law wanting to fight for justice and humanity and all of those things that quite rightly people attach importance to. But it's not all about that. You know, there are things like tax and property law and so on. And even the things that you think are going to be interesting turn out to be a little bit more difficult or problematic than you thought they were. And that's all part of the fun of learning the law. It's part of the great thing about it. But my main advice is find enough about it which you enjoy.
That's very, very good advice. And so we were talking about, you've explained all the various things that you've done throughout your career. And before we were recording, we also discussed how we've both equally got a very unconventional route. We haven't gone down the traditional path. And so I love the fact that I qualified to be a lawyer in my 30s, and I was a banker before, and you were an academic, and you taught law, and you were a law commissioner as well. So we've both taken a very different route. For me, that wasn't intentional. It just so happened I started in banking, and I thought, actually, I fancy doing a bit of this, and maybe I'll go and do a sales trade. But when I was 14, I did want to be a lawyer. So that was always at the back of my mind, where I felt like I hadn't quite achieved success until I'd tick that box and I'd become a lawyer. So that's why I became a lawyer in my 30s, because I actually, and through my banking work, I naturally was looking at legal contracts. So it just always just kept, the legal world just always just kept popping up into my career. And so one day I said, right, I'm going to go to law school, the University of Law, and I'm going to qualify. So that's what I did. Was it intentional for you to have quite a varied career, or was it like me where you just started one thing and thought, maybe I'll try something else?
I think it was that each thing that I did, was quite a challenge.
Yes.
So I had to get over the imposter syndrome and can I do it, and get it under my belt, so to speak. But then I was usually looking for the next ambition on. So I didn't have a plan that I start at A and I get through to Z or whatever. But I did have a plan once I got on top of the current job.
Yes.
What's the next challenge to look for? And different challenges came along at different times, because everything that I did as an academic led, one way or another, not through my planning it, to a public appointment. You know, a short-term, part-time public appointment, including my first judicial appointment as a chair of mental health review tribunals, and that's because my first book was on mental health law, and I wrote it for social workers and psychiatrists, but it led to that appointment. And so it was things like that, serendipitous things in a way. And so once I'd been an academic for 18 years, I thought I would quite like to move on from that, and that's when the Law Commission came up, and so I went into law reform and part-time judging, and when I'd done 9.5 years of that, I thought, I would really quite like to be a full-time judge in the High Court, and so that's what happened. And then when I was in the High Court, I thought, I'd quite like to be in the Court of Appeal. When I was in the Court of Appeal, I'd quite like to be a law lord. So, one thing at a time.
Definitely. And you've mentioned the word or the phrase imposter syndrome. You've become the first female for so many different things, smashing glass ceilings throughout your career. And you mentioned that there were times when you had imposter syndrome. How did you handle that? I mean, we've got so many successful women who experience this. What tips and advice would you give to anyone, male or female, maybe from diverse backgrounds, maybe from non-diverse backgrounds, but we all go through it. What advice would you give someone?
Well, I think the first thing is you are not alone.
No.
And although women are prepared to own up to it, I think many men also suffer from it. Although I have to say that one of the things that made me quite ambitious in the course of my career was when I went to Cambridge and encountered all those entitled young men, who gave the impression that they took it for granted that they would go to Cambridge, they took it for granted they would go to the bar or to a top job in the city, whereas the women felt much more diffident and privileged to be there and not so sure what was going to happen next. So I think that's one reason for not being too sure when you enter a new and challenging phase in your life, whether it's going to work out. And all you have to do is to tell yourself, well, somebody put me here, somebody must have thought I could do it, so I'd better try and prove them right.
Yes.
I think that's how I got over it.
Sounds good. And it sounds like you've made a decision, I'm going to do this role, then this role, then this role. The previous guest, she came across a lot of no's. It sounds like you've clearly got a lot of yeses, but how did you handle the no's?
Oh, but I did get some no's.
Yeah.
I applied for, in those days, there weren't a lot of professors in any university law faculty. There would be a handful. And of course, anybody who was a serious academic wanted to become a professor. And I applied for 3 professorships at universities within travelling distance of Manchester. And I didn't get any of them. And that was quite cross-making, because I thought I probably was well qualified for them, especially as time went on. And of course, now I'm desperately grateful to them.
Yes.
Because if I'd got any of those professorships, I would probably never have applied to the Law Commission, never become a law commissioner, and never become a full-time judge. So I think one has to say that setbacks, even if they make you cross because you maybe feel that they're unjust setbacks, can also mean that there are other opportunities that are going to come along.
100%. I always say rejection is just a redirection. There's something better around the corner for you. So you are a self-confessed girly swat.
As I said.
Yes. You have worked in a male-dominated environment for decades and succeeded. This once again comes back to advice. What advice would you give to a young female who's entering the workplace now? And it's still very much, when you look at banking and law, it's still very much male-dominated. Even though we're doing great work when it comes to diversity and inclusion behind the scenes, in the boardroom, within chambers, but it's still predominantly male-dominated. What advice would you give to a female?
Well, I think the first piece of advice is that it is not male-dominated in the way that it was when I started out.
No. There has been progress.
There's been a huge amount of progress. There are lots of wonderful young women entering the legal profession, and I think banking too, but particularly the legal profession. it's more than half of the people qualifying as solicitors are women.
That's right.
And about half the people qualifying as barristers are women.
Yep.
So there are plenty of you about, and you can affirm one another by there being plenty of you about. The difficulty is attrition, and that applies in most professions, that around sort of 15 to 20 years seniority, people in the law, not all of them, but some of them, and more women than men, decide that they don't want to stay in self-employed practice as a barrister or a solicitor anymore. I think it used to be the case with the women that they would probably give up for a while and then go into something a little bit different when they came back because the children were now manageable, let's put it that way. Now I think a lot of the women in the law go for other law jobs that are more manageable than self-employed practice. And I keep on stressing this to them. There are a lot of law jobs, and quite a lot of them are employed law jobs. And that means that you can manage your timetable in your life much more successfully than you can if you're in self-employed practice, particularly as a barrister, because there you're a cottage industry and you only need yourself to make money. So people go into the government legal service, which is a hugely stimulating and challenging job. They go into the local government lawyers. There's the magistrates' court advisors, who used to be called clerks. There are lots of jobs in commerce, finance, and industry. So that's what I think people should be aware of, the variety of what there is out there to do, and not necessarily think they're going to do one thing for the rest of their career. Although there's nothing wrong with doing that if you like it and you're good at it.
Yeah, 100%. I read somewhere that one of your proudest moments was your leading role in the development of the Children's Act 1989. And your colleagues refer to it as Brenda's weird child law.
That's right.
Where did that come from? Why did they call it Brenda's weird child law?
Well, I think the main reason for that, this was at the Law Commission.
Yes.
When I was engaged in a very big project to reform the law relating to the care and upbringing of children. Both childcare law, which is where you have to take children away from their families or protect them from their families or help their families to do better, but also the law about parents and their relationship with their children and what happens if their relationship with one another breaks down, and so on and so forth. So there's all of that. And it was a huge mess with all sorts of different rules, remedies, procedures, depending on what court you were in. And we wanted to make it principled and coherent. But I was doing a lot of this not with the Law Commission, but with the Department of Health and Social Security, as it then was, because the childcare law was a joint project. So that made it a bit weird, because it was going on outside the Law Commission. The other thing about it is that child law is largely a matter of discretion. There aren't hard and fast rules, or at least there are one or two, but not very many. And if there are disputes, there aren't rules governing it. It's a matter of what is the best for the child. And you've got a wide range of options and a wide range of things to take into consideration. So nothing clear-cut and dried. I think that's what he meant when he said it was weird.
Wonderful. So, is that your proudest moment? I'm sure you've got many others.
Well,
what would you say is your proudest moment?
Well, pride
career?
goeth before a fall, so I try and resist the temptation to pride. I do think that the Children Act, which is of course not solely my achievement, it was very much teamwork. The team in the Law Commission that were doing it, and the team in the Department of Health and Social Security who were doing it. And it had basically a mother and a father, and I was the mother, and there was a civil servant, now sadly no longer with us, called Rupert Hughes, who was the father. And we managed to work on it together. So I am very proud of that, because it was a groundbreaking piece of legislation that managed to produce a coherent framework and scheme, which has largely stood the test of time. It has been a bit messed about, but not much. Its basic structure is still there. So yes, that is a matter of pride.
Yeah.
There are some judicial decisions, of course, that I'm pride, again, it's the wrong word, that I'm pleased about. I'm glad they happened. And I suppose the one that I'm most pleased about that it happened and the way it happened is the prorogation case against the Prime Minister, but no doubt we'll come on to that later.
Yes, definitely. Well, let's come on to it now while we're here. I mean, that's why you became a global name, because on the day of that case, you wore a spider brooch.
That's not the main reason why
I know.
name.
Yeah.
No.
Why don't you tell I know that, but why don't you tell the audience why you were called the Spiderwoman? Because we've got your book here.
Well,
Call the Spiderwoman.
Yes, it's called Spiderwoman
because
I did become famous because of that case, and it so happened that when I announced the judgment in that case, I was wearing a dress with a spider brooch on it. And in fact, it was that dress that I was wearing.
Oh, wow.
And I chose the dress.
Yes.
Because you can look, it's a nice, neat
And
little...
for those that can't see it, this is the book and the dress.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a nice, neat, subdued, demure
Yes.
wool crepe.
Simple.
Yes,
understated.
exactly.
Yeah.
And it had a spider brooch on it. But when I got the dress out of the wardrobe in the morning, and I thought about the dress carefully, I noticed that brooch had dropped off and I couldn't find it anywhere. So I thought, I've got to have a brooch. And so I went to my brooch drawer and pulled out the drawer, and I found another spider, and so I put that spider on. Never crossed my mind that people would read all sorts of things into it, and because that wasn't what I thought at all. But there we are. Lots of things have been read into it, I'm afraid, by those with suspicious minds.
Yes. And it's funny because all the things that you've achieved through your multi-decade career, so many people know you now as Spiderwoman.
Well, I did capitalise on it.
You wrote a book. And
because I was writing a memoir, and I thought, well, why not? We called it, to ourselves, the publisher, and that's what we called it to ourselves, and then it suddenly occurred to us, well, it's got to be called that. But the only reason that became so prominent was, of course, that the case was prominent. And we knew that it was all our cases are live streamed, and some of them are broadcast. And this was one of those that was being broadcast. And we knew that, of course, because it was a very important case, and it was a case about which people felt very strongly. What I hadn't realised was how interested a lot of people elsewhere in the world were. Not just in the Anglo-American common law world, so the Commonwealth, where the legal system is the same, much the same as ours. In America, where the legal system is not exactly the same as ours, but it has a lot of similarities because, of course, before the revolution, it was ours. But even yesterday, it's amazing to me, yesterday, when I was having dinner, somebody was introduced to me who was a German professor who said, yes, he'd been watching, how interested he was, and congratulating us on the case. And this is outside that world where you might expect it to be. So it was a surprise that it went so far around the world.
Yeah. But it was. I can recall watching that case, and it was just amazing. One of the things that we do at the Miranda Brawn Diversity Leadership Foundation, I know you are supporting that, so thank you for your support. We provide mentoring and coaching to our next generation of diverse leaders. Now, throughout your career, did you ever come across someone who mentored you, gave you guidance?
Not much.
Yeah, that's sad to hear.
Yes, but I don't think we called it mentoring then. And different people in leadership roles took different views of how much they should do. The person who probably, apart from when you're at school, there are inspirational school teachers. When you're at university, there are inspirational university teachers. So there were those, of course. And my mother was also an inspiration because she was a very determined woman who had to pick herself up after being very suddenly widowed when I was 13 and my younger sister was 12. And she had to give up work when she married my father in the 1930s because there was a marriage bar in the teaching profession. But she picked herself up, dusted herself down, dusted off her teaching qualifications and got herself a teaching job, so as to provide security and stability for us all. So she was a role model, and something of a mentor, of course, because all parents are. But I think the only person in my career who's been a serious mentor was a chap who was a professor at Manchester University, who later became my second husband, but that was much, much later.
Oh, wow.
And he was good to all of us because he took an interest in what we were doing as more junior academics. He asked us what we were doing. Nobody else had shown any curiosity before that. They'd expected us to tell them rather than ask. And when he saw opportunities that might be useful in progressing people's careers, he put them our way. And he did a lot of that sort of thing. And then when I was approached to become a baby judge, a part-time judge, about 1982, he was incredibly encouraging about going for it and doing it, rather than one or two of the other professors who said, oh, no, you shouldn't do that, it'll get in the way of your academic career, and so on and so forth. But he knew perfectly well, hadn't got in the way of his academic career doing judicial work, and he didn't see why it should get in the way of mine. So yes, that was the closest to a mentor that I had, and a very good mentor too.
And sometimes all you need is that one good mentor to help you. And he
right.
became your second husband. So
he did a lot longer. Well, we became rivals for positions at the Law Commission. We never thought that we would both get positions. Only 5 law commissioners, and the idea that 2 would be appointed from the University of Manchester didn't cross our minds. So we were very surprised when they actually appointed both of us. And then we became equal colleagues.
I love that.
Yeah.
That's a true equal partnership.
That's absolutely right.
Equality at its best. So there's so much work being done now on diversity and inclusion, equity, belonging, within the legal sector and beyond. Everyone's working on that. And I've been part of working on the diversity and inclusion sector, well, just working around that for decades. Started off when I was working in investment banking, and I would chair a networking resource group, to now launching. We're 10 years old next year. You'll have to come to our 10-year anniversary at the House of Lords, but we're 10 years old next year. And you know, I've been mentoring our next generation for over 2 decades, helping our next generation of diverse leaders to get into professional services. Did you I'm assuming you must have helped so many women and so many diverse people throughout your career.
Not on purpose, if you see what I mean,
Yeah.
not through anything formal like mentoring. I think only in 2 ways, one of which is setting an example.
Yes.
You know, if
If
little
you
old
can
Brenda
do it.
Hale can do it, you know, why can't I do it? Which I think
Yes.
is very important,
Yeah.
that people can see people like them doing it. I don't entirely believe if you can't see it, you can't be it, because somebody's got to be the first, haven't they, in all sorts of dimensions of diversity. But I do think it helps a lot if you see somebody who's not that different, and so you can aspire to what they're doing. So I've done that. And I've also spoken up for a very long time on the need for diversity in the legal profession and the judiciary, which again, quite a lot of people, even leading women, have not done. I don't blame them for that. I think sometimes it's because they're slightly bothered, maybe subconsciously, that it'll be seen as self-serving. You know, if you're busy fighting the fight for women when there aren't very many women around, are you putting yourself forward in a self-serving way? So the more senior I got, the less I felt that anybody could possibly, level that accusation at me. I wasn't doing it to put myself forward
Definitely
or to get myself on.
Or self-promotion, as people might call it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it was much more my duty.
Yes.
On behalf of, at first, women, of course, and then if one broadens it out into the other dimensions of diversity, which are now much more in need of attention in the judiciary and legal profession than gender. I'm not saying that the gender problem is completely solved for the reasons we were talking about earlier, but nevertheless, the other problems are greater.
What do you think the future is for the legal sector and the judiciary? Well,
it would be rather nice if the powers that be in this country respected the justice system and thought it was important.
All around the world. I mean, you just look at what's happening in Pakistan and
Well,
the judicial system there.
Well,
that's one example.
That's true. We don't suffer, I don't think really at all, from political interference in the decisions of the judges. The judges are independent, they are impartial, they are incorruptible. I think we can be fairly certain about that. What we can't be confident of is that the justice system as a whole has the resources that it needs to do the job that the people need it to do. You know, huge delays in criminal trials, backlogs at every level of the justice system, not just in crime, but of course it seems more important in crime because there are people being locked up without yet having been tried, overflowing prisons in a ghastly state, courts without enough staff, without enough judges sometimes, without enough facilities, and so on, and just a general lack of respect for the justice system. And yet the justice system is fundamental to a civilised society. You can't have a civilised society without a functioning justice system.
That's right.
We need to convince, everybody out there needs to convince their parliamentarians that it is important.
I totally agree, Brenda. I totally agree with you. We're coming to the end. This has come so quick. So you are 80 years young next year.
I'm 80 next year, yes.
80 years young. I think 80 is the new 60, perhaps?
Well, I'm rather hoping it's the new 50.
Well, oh my God, why not make it the new 40? Let's just go for it.
No, anyway, it is true.
Yeah,
yes.
But you're amazing. You're doing so much, to help our next generation. You go to universities and, just the fact that you're here today, sharing your experience and your knowledge, giving guidance, because this podcast, the D.A.R.E podcast, is really like mentoring and coaching at your fingertips. And it's for everyone. We have conversations with global leaders like yourself, celebrities from all different walks of life. And so I think just the fact that you are going out there and you're talking to lots of university students and you're giving your time and you're working with charities. Now, you mentioned you work with charities. What types of charities do you work with? Clearly, you're working with the Miranda Brawn Diversity Leadership Foundation today, being part of this. But what other charities do you work with?
Well, I'm a trustee of 3 very different charities. I mean, one is the Supreme Court Arts Trust, which is just there to promote education and exhibitions and the art at the Supreme Court. So that's a very small thing. But the other 2, you wouldn't believe how different they are. One is the Wolf Institute in the University of Cambridge, which is an academic institution which is devoted to improving the understanding between the 3 Abrahamic faiths. So it started with Jews and Christians. It's named after Lord Wolf, who was Lord Chief Justice. And then, of course, it expanded to include Islam. And so they do a lot of research, both ancient and modern, quite a lot of public engagement and public education now. Anyway, so I'm a trustee of that charity, which I think is right up my street because it's something I believe very, very strongly on.
And that's so interesting, especially now it's timely with what's happening in the world when it comes to the wars that's happening with various religions and faiths. I think that's a wonderful charity to be part of.
Yes, and it's part of trying to keep conversations going.
Yeah.
When sometimes it's difficult. And if it's an impartial academic institution, it can be easier to do it. The other one is the Green Howards Trust. Now, the Green Howards is a regiment which was for a long time associated with Richmond in Yorkshire, where I grew up. And it has a museum in the middle of the town. And it has a trust which runs the museum and various other things to do with the regiment. The regiment has now been absorbed into the Yorkshire Regiment, but there is still a huge feeling behind the whole Green Howards tradition. And of course that's educational as well, because it is trying to get over something of the function, purpose and history, not only of the regiment but of warfare generally. So they've just opened an exhibition on D.A.R.E. commemoration, of course. So these are good fun things to do.
Amazing. I love the fact you've got that link back to where you were born and raised, back in Yorkshire, and you still got that. So what else would you like to achieve, either personally or professionally?
Oh, well, I'd like to finish my next book.
Oh, I didn't even know you were writing another book. So
Yes,
what's this book on? And we're going to have to get you to sign. We're going to get Brenda to sign your book, your last book, on air. Rolling eyes.
Okay, yes.
But what is your next book on?
Well, it's basically trying to get over the message that I was just banging on about, about the importance of the law and the justice system to everybody.
Yes.
Because people tend to think, well, it's the criminal justice system.
Or it's for the lawyers to figure out.
And nothing to do with me.
Yeah.
Or if it's transactional, it's for the lawyers to figure out. Nothing to do with me. Whereas, of course, the law touches every part of our lives.
And every single person.
Every single person.
Yeah.
And so I've got a section dealing with what grassroots courts and tribunals do, and I've based that on visits that I have paid. I have turned up at random places, like the Benefits Tribunal in Gray's Inn Road and the Middlesbrough County Court, and just written up what goes on an ordinary, everyday day, because it's so interesting. And of course the family court, also very interesting. And then there's a section about different sorts of rights that people have. School kids have rights. Women have rights, workers have rights, patients have rights. Just talking about the sort of dilemmas that the law has to deal with, and asking the reader, well, what do you think should happen? Giving them a situation and saying, what do you think should happen here? And then telling them what the court did so that they can say it's good, bad, or indifferent. And then the last section, which I'm still working on, is how laws are made. So I've got a section, obviously, on the courts as lawmakers, which is basically about the Supreme Court. And I'm about to write the chapter on Parliament, obviously, as lawmakers. And I'm going to take because it's all case studies, you see. It's meant to be concrete, down-to-earth things that have actually happened.
Yeah.
So I'm going to take the passage of the Safety of Rwanda Bill.
That will be a really
as
good
an
one.
Interesting case study. It's not in a way typical of legislation, but having followed it the whole way through in the Lords, I can definitely write about it from personal experience, so that'll be quite good fun.
I think that's going to be a really good section of the book. Now, while we're here on air, why don't we get you to sign? This is my personal book, so you can sign it. Maybe we'll...
And note, this is where I normally sign,
perfect.
But notice the spider on the chessboard. The chessboard, because...
Why the chessboard?
Well, that is because my beloved second husband, of whom we were talking, apart from the law, his other great love was chess.
Oh.
And he used to say that he was a first-rate chess player. He has won various championships.
Yes.
When Britain was a third-rate chess country. And then, of course, we became a first-rate chess country because we got lots of grandmasters and so on. So he was a third-rate player in a first-rate country. So that's what he used to say. But that's why the chessboard is there.
Love it, because I wondered about that.
Yeah.
So now we know why there's a chessboard in the book.
Well, you'll probably find it if you sort of ploughed through right to the bitter end. Yes.
So it's interesting, though, because they do say, I've got a friend that actually goes to prisons to teach criminals chess. Because apparently that does help with the mindset and actually reforming and getting them to think about something positive. So now, we've only got one more question left.
Ooh.
And so, for those that don't know, the D.A.R.E podcast, D.A.R.E, the D stands for having the determination, the A is taking the appropriate action, the R is the resilience and also the realistic assessment, self-assessment that you take in terms of achieving your goals. And the E is having that energy. It's all about having that positive energy, the enthusiasm to make your dreams come true. But I always ask my guests as the very last question, what do you dare our audience to do?
Go for it.
Go. Love it.
I mean, just as simple as
3 words. Go for it.
And I think, could I add to that?
You can add to that, of course.
Because quite a lot of women, we've talked about it before, worry about whether they're up to a new job when they've got it. In my generation, and possibly even still today, some women worried whether they'd got the job because they were a woman, because people were looking for women to appoint. And this will apply to other diverse candidates, when people are looking for somebody to appoint. So I would say, go for it, give it your best, and if it doesn't work out, It's their fault, not yours.
It's their loss. That's great advice. Thank you so much, Baroness Brenda Hale, for being a guest on the D.A.R.E podcast with City AM. It's an absolute pleasure to have you here. I'm delighted. I can't wait for our audience to listen to this. And for those that are not aware, you can subscribe and follow the D.A.R.E podcast. We are available on YouTube and all your usual podcast platforms. So make sure to follow and subscribe. You do not want to miss this episode. Thank you for watching the D.A.R.E podcast with City AM, and our guest has been Baroness Brenda Hale with Miranda Brawn. Thank you.